Hey, it's Ed. Before we get started, I've got some quick announcements I want to run by you. Number one, I've got a virtual event coming up with New York Times bestselling author David Gessner, who has been on this podcast, I think 3 times. And he'll be coming back on later this summer, but he's got a new book out about Henry David Thoreau. And I'll be doing an interview with him through the Tattered Cover, which is Denver's premier independent bookseller. You can go to mountainandprairie.com/events to learn more about that event. It's free. You can sign up. If you're not Zoomed out, I can pretty much guarantee it'll be a funny and informative conversation about everything from Henry David Thoreau to Theodore Roosevelt to public lands to Wallace Stegner, Edward Abbey. If you've listened to those episodes with Gessner, you know it's always an entertaining conversation. And I've started doing more of these virtual events about topics that may or may not be related to the West. I don't release them as podcasts if they're not related to the West, but there are a few video conversations that are up on the website, most recently with Dr. Drew Lanham, ornithologist from Clemson University, that a lot of people seem to enjoy. So you can just head over to mountainandprairie.com and look around and see if there's anything that catches your attention. Thanks a lot. Hey, this is Ed Roberson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guests today are Matt Barber and Joel Doub. Matt and Joel are the owners of Tom Morgan Rodsmiths, one of the West's most renowned custom fly rod companies. I was introduced to Matt and Joel nearly 3.5 years ago and was quickly fascinated by their entrepreneurial journey and Tom Morgan Rodsmiths' storied history in the fly fishing world. As longtime listeners may remember, I recorded a podcast with Matt and Joel in January of 2018. About a year after they'd purchased the company from Tom and Gerri Morgan. In that conversation, we talked in depth about the history of the company, Matt and Joel's unconventional backgrounds, and their plans for the future of Tom Morgan Rodsmiths. It was a fun conversation that led to a great friendship between all of us. But in the more than 3 years since I published that episode, Tom Morgan Rodsmiths has grown in size and scope, and Matt and Joel have continued to evolve as business owners. They've enjoyed highs that include being featured in the New York Times and steadily growing their sales year over year. But they've also faced unexpected challenges, most notably a global pandemic and its far-reaching supply chain and economic effects. But thanks to their creativity, planning, complementary skill sets, and unwavering commitment to the values of founders Tom and Gerri Morgan, Matt and Joel have thrived as entrepreneurs and built wonderful lives for their families in Montana. A quick one-time snapshot of any entrepreneurial venture can never provide the full, vivid story of a company and its owners. So I wanted to bring Matt and Joel back on the podcast to give us an update and share some of their hard-earned wisdom and lessons learned. We talked a bit about the specifics of the fly fishing business, but most of the topics we discussed were around resilience, teamwork, marketing, managing complex work, and maintaining a positive attitude. All actionable advice that almost anyone could put to use in business or creative endeavors. You don't need to listen to our first episode to glean value from this one, but it's worth a listen too, so there's a link in the notes to access that episode if you'd like. Be sure to check out the Tom Morgan Rodsmiths website and follow them on social media. Links to everything are in the notes. They'll be celebrating the company's 25th anniversary in the coming weeks and offering some special one-of-a-kind products that will be of interest to anglers and outdoor enthusiasts of all stripes. Thanks again to Matt and Joel for the inspiring conversation, and I hope you enjoy it. Last time we talked, it was over almost 3.5 years ago. My youngest daughter had not yet been born. You guys had been in business for almost exactly a year. And at the time, I thought that was a long time. And now here we are, way out from that. And you guys have just continued to evolve the business. And so I was thinking maybe just as a refresher for people who have started listening since then, could y'all just give quick backgrounds on yourselves, because you're not lifelong fishing industry guys, and then just a quick overview of Tom Morgan Rodsmith.
Sure. So I grew up back on the East Coast, grew up fly fishing. My great-grandfather had a pond in the Berkshires of Massachusetts, and we had bass and things in there, and just he was a huge outdoorsman. And so we started at a really young age learning to fish, and I learned to fly fish catching bass, but, fishing on the ocean, things like that. So I always loved fishing, and went to college back on the East Coast at St. Lawrence University, and just knew I wasn't really meant to live on the East Coast, no offense to it, but
I know the feeling.
I graduated college, and I think it was a week later, my car was packed and I moved out to Park City, Utah, and lived there, and then eventually made my way to Boulder and then Denver, and started teaching and taught at a school called Stanley British Primary School in Denver. And I was there 17 years and worked my way out of the classroom through doing some admissions, and then eventually was the head of the middle school there. And I loved it. I loved every minute of it, teaching, working with kids. But I think just it's a bit of a pressure cooker on the administrative side, and knew I needed a change. And, I also think that I was always meant to be somebody that lived in a smaller town, like a Pinedale, a Crested Butte, a smaller place. And I ended up in Denver, and I loved it, but it just didn't speak to me like the way a smaller place did. So I think the stress of the job and the stress of living in the Front Range in Colorado, as it was growing even before COVID, it was meteoric. And so I needed a change, and Joel and I, I'll let Joel kind of give his background, but we both knew we wanted to move, and knew, started talking with Tom and Gerri about this company at the same time. It was kind of, meant to happen that we started researching buying Tom Morgan Rodsmiths, and it all came together.
And Joel, and I'll tell people, you can go back and listen to the old episode for the full in-depth story, but this is great context. So yeah, Joel, can you give a bit of your background?
You bet. Yeah. So I used to joke about this. I was born, raised, and educated in Colorado. So I grew up kind of west of Denver, back, when it was kind of a rural place. Denver was a real different city in the 70s when I grew up there, and went to school at Boulder, kind of lifelong fisherman, much like Matt. Got my first fly rod, I think, when I was 6. Grew up near a pond and did a lot of pan fishing, bass fishing, trout fishing when we were camping, and we camped, almost every weekend in the summer and the fall when I was a kid. So explored a lot of the mountains there, and I think, kind of fell into different jobs after school. Lived a little bit in Boston and Seattle, so kind of did West Coast, East Coast, lived with friends, and had jobs doing medical research and some nonprofit work, and kind of settled into my real career in Denver, which ended up being in medical device sales, which I really enjoyed for about 15 years, but had an evolution from being in a small company where I felt really connected to our customers and all parts of the process, to being bought by successively larger and larger companies, to where things became very much like corporate America, where things are pretty siloed, and you kind of do your thing and check off the boxes on your goal sheet for the year to get your bonus, but you don't really have much connection to what you're doing, or feel real fulfilled by being parts of a lot of different parts of the process, I guess. And so I think I had a little disenfranchisement there. And then Matt and I both had young kids about the same time, and we're in a group of friends where we would often find each other at parties or gatherings with a beer, lamenting the fact that it took 2 hours to get to fishing, or 4-hour round trip to go skiing, or just the growth of Denver was starting to kind of choke us, and the idea of having young kids there and teaching them how to be safe crossing busy streets, and all the things that go with living in the city that we loved when we were single and younger, maybe just didn't fit with what we saw ourselves being as adults, although maybe we were past adults at that point, I don't know. But, and so I think we kind of started thinking about doing something like this and looking around for places to live. And, Bozeman is such a wonderful spot, as I think a lot of people have discovered in the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Maybe even before we moved here. We feel like old timers now, but we're certainly not. Just because it has kind of a young vibe with the university here. Obviously, the natural resources are phenomenal, and has an airport, and has a lot of the assets that we look for in a city, without some of the growth and the other constraints that come along with it. It just all kind of worked out. And so Matt and I think our conversation was, well, how serious are we about moving? And it turned out that we got more and more serious as we learned more and more about the opportunity, which culminated in us moving here.
No, that's a great overview. And again, I encourage people to go back and listen to the first one, because it's super inspiring stuff. Back then it was inspiring, but now, here we are over 3 years out from that first conversation, and starting a business is tough under any circumstances. And I feel like the last 3 years have been, in some ways, they felt like 10 years. It's just so much crazy stuff has happened. And even during, think in the mid 90s when it was smooth sailing, starting a startup business in the fishing world would be tough. And you guys have done it during this tumultuous time. So I thought it would be interesting, rather than just the snapshot of when you guys were getting started and everything was exciting, to come back around and give another point in this entrepreneurial journey you're on.
One thing to interrupt your question, Ed, we were on a phone call earlier, Joel and I told the story that in our first podcast, how you said, hey, look, I've been to business school, and everything you guys are doing is against everything I learned in business school. Yeah. And so I think that's kind of fun to revisit it, through in the lens of all that's been going on in the world, and also, kind of a non-traditional business model. I guess the odds would say we probably shouldn't have made it this far, but so it's fun to think back on it.
Well, that's when I was reviewing our old episode and looking at the notes, and that was one of the things that stuck out, is that everything they taught me in business school, you guys are doing it opposite. And I remember when I was in business school, and they'd have these guest speakers come in, and some of them were like corporate America types. But every now and then they'd bring in an entrepreneur. And I remember one of them, who was very successful, said, I do things pretty much the exact opposite of what they're telling you to do here. And that's the one I remembered. So, just a broad question. How's it been going? How has this journey been since January of 2018 when we first met?
Well, first of all, I'll just say, I wish you had told us that second story, because I think we got off our first podcast and said, did you hear what Ed said about how we're doing everything wrong?
No, I admire it, man. That's the sign of people who are going to get shit done.
I think, the quick summary, I guess, is, we're still here. We're still making rods. I think we've been very fortunate, to have some people that have helped us along the way with some pretty seminal questions and challenges. I always go back to the quote. I think nobody really builds a business on their own these days. Maybe there are a few examples, but it takes a lot of people, I think. And we were super fortunate that Tom had built a relationship or a network of relationships of people that he helped. And so, we've been able to kind of salvage that and pay that forward a little bit, and have people that we never thought we'd be on the phone with that helped us figure out why a ferrule broke, or who do you call when you need this part, or what's wrong with this material? Why isn't anybody using it? Or, things you just wouldn't know, and you wouldn't think to ask because you didn't know they were even a question. And so we've been really lucky in that regard. I think, in some weird ways, the pandemic for fishing and outdoor sports in general has been a bit of a boon. We certainly are busier than we've ever been, and have had our best months since the pandemic started. I think some of that is just people reevaluating their life choices and maybe saying, I do want to fish more. I don't want to retire and have bad knees, and said I didn't fish, with my kids. And so people, I think, as a general rule and a mindset are thinking, this is something I've always wanted to do, and I'm going to take the opportunity now. And a lot of those bucket list items have to do with fly fishing in particular, and sports and hobbies in general. It's funny, I listened to NPR this morning, and I don't listen to it that much, but there was an economist on there, and the reporter was basically asking him the question of what the hell is going on with our economy right now. And the economist doesn't know.
I listened to one that said that yesterday. It was the New York Times. Yeah.
You have all these labor shortages, but then home prices are crazy, and people are buying fly rods from us. There's like this weird combination of factors, and we're all kind of along for the ride. And so I think we feel pretty fortunate to be having growth during a time when I think a lot of industries didn't have growth. And I think for March and April last year, we thought, oh gosh, where's our growth? Because it was really slow. And then it started to pick up in May, and it's kind of gradually gained steam for us to the point where I think we're doing better than we ever have. And that has to do with, I think, all those combination of factors. I would say just real quickly, and then I'll let Matt talk to it as well. I think one of the things we've learned is when we did this, we did write a business plan, and we did say, like, these are the risks. What are the worst things that could happen to us? Let's think if Tom dies shortly after we bought the company. Well, Tom passed away about 6 months after we bought the company. And I would just say to people that are planning to do some of these ventures, you really have to think about worst case scenarios, and not in hey, I have identified that and I wrote it down, I'm good, but like, what do you do when they happen, and not even what you're going to do to mitigate them, which I think we approached it as kind of like, how do I mitigate this risk? But more like, what's your actions, or what can you do when it happens? When you lose a supplier, or you don't have a rod that works, or your product is breaking, or all those things that can happen. They're probably, at least half of them are going to happen. And so I think you really have to think about if that's a death knell for your business, if that were to happen, or if it's something you can overcome.
Did you guys, in that plan, was there a part about a bat in China causing a little bit of trouble?
Oh yeah. We had the penguins in there for sure. Yeah.
I even called it with the canal. I was like, if our ship gets stuck sideways in the canal, how do we overcome it? Yeah, visionary.
So one question just about you guys in this journey. I remember when I used to live in Boulder, there was this startup incubator there called Techstars, and I had some friends that were in it. And one of the things that stuck out in my mind, I mean, I'm as far from a tech guy as you could find, but one of the things that stuck out in my mind was that Techstars would not accept businesses that were run by a single founder. It couldn't be just one person with a good idea who was cranking this thing out of their garage or whatever. It had to have at least two co-founders. And I'm kind of a lone ranger sometimes. So I was thinking, I don't know that I could do that. And so I was wondering if y'all could talk about the benefits, challenges, benefits, whatever, of being co-founder, not co-founders, but co-owners, and maybe what each of you over the last, 3.5 years since we talked, what you've determined that each of you are good at, or what you bring, and how you complement each other, and how important that is.
I think that book has probably been written out there about founding companies and strengths and challenges. And I think I'm just guessing, there's strengths and challenges to both directions. I could see why, those incubators say, you don't want a single founder because it all lives in one head and there's no checks and balances. So I'd say that's the greatest benefit to me of both of us doing this, is that, if I was going down some rabbit hole of like a new product I wanted to develop or a partnership I wanted to have for the company, and I was chasing that and it became my obsession, there's nobody to ask questions at that point and say, is this good for our vision overall as a company? Does this get us where we want to go? Or, and I think that, two people have that many more connections, that many more conversations, out and about at trade shows or people we meet. And so I think we bring in twice as many ideas, twice as many opportunities. So I would understand that, I think luckily for Joel and I, we were friends prior to doing this. I don't know that if I was kind of saying, oh, okay, this guy's got some cash, we can put it together and buy this company, and we didn't know each other, I think, and then had to learn it'd be like an arranged marriage, where like you've got to learn the person as you're learning the business. And so I think Joel and I would be the first to say we've had, days that are, celebration, high fives, best sales we've ever had. And then days where we're butting heads and, not in agreement on things. But because of our background, I think that's been healthy. And so I would equate it to like a relationship where you had that over time before getting married kind of thing. And so, yeah, I agree. I think that's a wise direction that those.
Yeah, I wonder with Techstars what the motivation was there. I mean, it seems to me the burden is at least somewhat lighter if there are two or more than if there's one. And so I think, we hear this all the time about burnout and the dangers of burnout. And I think certainly we've had our times when we feel really burnout and times when you feel less so. I think probably the most important thing, and Matt's great about reminding me about this, is just being in the office together, just organically. Like there's an opportunity there for somebody to say, you're not crazy, that is a great idea. Yeah. Or just to have a sounding board instead of being just one founder. I think it'd be really hard to be kind of a lone ranger in the situation, at least with us. Our business seems complicated. I'm sure all businesses are complicated. When you start thinking about vendors and sourcing and all the different components that go into just kind of keeping the lights on and doing your thing every day. But I would think that it's a lot easier having somebody that's at that level of responsibility, that has that level of accountability for the employees in the process to feel smooth and not feel totally on your own. I think Matt made a great point too. Like, I can't imagine doing it while you're learning somebody else and starting and running the business. I think that would be pretty tough.
Yeah, it would be. But then, kind of the people who listen to this podcast, I think when I say that I'm cynical, they're surprised because I think I'm the best version of myself when I'm talking on this podcast. But, there is the other side of, they always talk about don't go into business with family and don't go, because it can, those people very well. And then if things go sideways, you've got challenges in your family. So, I mean, I think that's awesome that you are good friends, but I don't think you should overlook how, how impressive it is that you've been able to stay really good friends, because there's a long list of people that go into business as friends and then it doesn't work out. So, I think that y'all are in the middle of it daily, but I think that's a huge accomplishment that you shouldn't take lightly, because it can be rare. So
we heard of a company at the very outset that we know, I won't throw the name out there out of respect for them, but small, like our size, small company, two friends bought it. And they weren't successful. I think it was a matter of a year or so that they had basically run it into the ground. And the story that we heard was about the dissolution of the company when they were, I don't know who was repossessing the machinery and that kind of stuff. And these two good friends were at opposite ends of this warehouse, facing away from each other, arms folded, and not willing to talk to each other. And I remember that, just the image of that story really striking me. And because, we were in the honeymoon phase, it was about that time we were talking to you, and, everything was going to be perfect. We were going to make millions of dollars selling fly rods. It was going to, we're going to change the world. And then hearing this story, and I remember it was a good shock, and it was kind of like, oh God, I don't want that happening, to stand in a corner and do that. So
I would say the other thing that's made us pretty lucky too is that we're different enough in the way we do things that there's more complement than there is redundancy.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's something you can choose when you're choosing a business partner, but I think if you're able to fill in the gaps around each other somewhat, that makes it a lot easier to work with each other.
Yeah, because the other one's strengths, you can delegate. You don't really have ownership because the other person is better at that.
The things I enjoy doing might not be the things Matt enjoys doing. So either there's some enjoyment there too that just is natural instead of forced.
I heard a story the other day of a family, I'll just leave it at a family business, where these two brothers got real mad. One of them tried to run over the other one with a car. So if you end up with your arms crossed, you're doing all right relative.
You read in the paper about me chasing Joel down a dirt road.
Like whipping him with bamboo. So one of the things that I've been so impressed with from our initial conversation, and full disclosure, we've gotten to be really good friends, and I've stayed at your house. I mean, and I've been to y'all's shop, and we've stayed in very close touch. And obviously y'all, you have your messaging down for the business, but even when we're sitting around shooting the shit or on the phone or in person, I feel like both of y'all, a thing that comes up that I've noticed is your respect and reverence for Tom and Gerri, the original owners. And it's not just lip service that you say when you're, on the record or whatever. I mean, like before we started talking, you said something along those lines, and this, their legacy is obviously extremely important to y'all. And so my question is, how has it been kind of making this business your own? Because it is your business now. And taking it maybe in new directions that it wouldn't have gone in, while maintaining that built-in reverence for the founders, because it's obviously there, and it seems like it's something that is just kind of a foundation in both of y'all's minds in everything you do. I don't know if it's a challenge or not, but how has that been, making it your own while staying true to the original vision?
I think, I think for Joel and I both, I look at Joel's family had this old historic family farm in North Carolina, and, a lot of connection to place and connection to land. And, my great grandfather Hudson had this farm in the Berkshires, and, where I grew up as a kid. And so I think story and legacy is how we were both raised. So I don't think about, honoring legacy as a forced thing or something that we had to figure out to do. It'd be weird to me to try not to do that. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's second nature for us. And I think as we've thought, one thing that we're doing right now as a good example is Tom was really focused. Tom's, he was born in Ennis, or not born, but raised in Ennis, and was a trout fisherman. So the rods we sell are trout rods. They're rods that Tom designed from his experience and loved. Yep. right now we have a couple prototype rods in the other side of the shop. We're developing an 8 and 9 weight saltwater rod right now. And that's not something that Tom and Gerri would have done. It wasn't, Tom wasn't a big saltwater fisherman. It didn't excite him. Or maybe, I don't know if it excited him, but he just didn't do much of it. Joel and I happen to love it. We love trout fishing. We also love, chasing stripers and albies and, permit and bonefish and tarpon and love it. So a passion project for us was to develop this new line of rods that, we hope we're going through the prototype process now and hope to have out fall or winter coming up. And it's been really exciting to develop a new rod, but at the same time, we've taken the core principles. How would Tom have done it? The quality of the fit and finishes on the rod were important. The durability and strength and redundancy, within the build to make sure that things were really strong and lasted was really important. And then it's going to be the customization with the customer. So we've taken kind of the guardrails that Tom and Gerri gave us, and then we get to have fun and say, if you buy a Morgan rod in a year, you'll have a choice between the freshwater line and the saltwater line. And the freshwater are Tom's designs, and the saltwater are Tom-inspired designs by Matt.
Yeah, I don't know if I have much to add to that. Honestly, it's funny. As he answered that, I was just thinking about the fact that we both had a lot of reverence for our parents and our grandparents and our families. And so I think that idea of coming from something instead of doing this all on your own, I think that's pretty natural for us. And Tom and Gerri both are such a part of the fabric of this. And, we talk about starting a new business. We didn't. We bought an existing business. And so that's part of the benefit we had is we bought into a brand that was Tom and Gerri and their story and their history somewhat, which really helped sustain us in the early days, I think. Not that we were trying to invent something new. We were trying to carry something on. And I still tell people this is the only way we know how to make rods is what they taught us. Mm-hmm. That's the foundation of everything we do. We certainly do some things that we developed on our own at this point because it's been years, but it all comes from that. And I think we're thankful for that. And like Matt said, it feels pretty natural for that to be something that we pay homage to on a regular basis.
Yeah, that all makes sense. And I think that's a great explanation for what I've seen, from both of y'all for a long time now. One of a very exciting thing, it was probably about this time last year, I guess, was that article that popped up in the New York Times about you guys. Can you kind of explain how that came to be and maybe the article? I'll link to it in the notes so people can read it, and then maybe what that meant for your business. Because it was, if I'm remembering correctly, it was fairly early in the pandemic when I think people were trying to figure out, all right, where the hell is this whole thing going? And then y'all got that great publicity. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So we had done an article with Big Sky Journal, and Janie Osborne, who's an amazing photographer, she just does great work, was the photographer for that piece. And, when you do any kind of photography with somebody or any kind of, writing or anything, they're in your space, they're around you a lot, you develop a relationship. So we got to know Janie really well. And we're more beneficiaries of her talent. She regularly has pieces in the New York Times for a variety of subject matter. And so Janie, did all this photography work for them. And so we pitched this idea of doing a piece about the legacy of our company and what we do. And Janie threw it out there. And, it's one of those things you hear radio silence for a while. And then out of the blue, we get a phone call that says, yeah, they think it's a great idea, and let's go with it. And what was unique about that article was it was a piece that was more of a photographic essay, so it was more about the imagery. And then it's a series in the New York Times where the photographer actually has to be the writer. So it's a really interesting thing where Janie had to step out of her comfort area, and do the actual writing. And so it was, kind of a unique piece. And I think we spent a lot of time together making it happen, and it was really incredible.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Matt identified early on too was this idea as a small business owner to have these moonshots. What is something we would dream could happen to us? And so that's, you write it down at the beginning here, like article in the New York Times, because our demographic reads the New York Times. Patagonia sponsors us and gives us free Patagonia for the rest of it. It's like whatever those things are, and you just kind of chip away at them. It's not something that happens overnight, And that just happened to be a confluence of somebody we got to know who had a connection there. And I still kind of vaguely remember like the first email, and it was like Matt sent me an email and I was like, oh, it'd be great if it ever happens. He's like, yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't count our chickens, but who knows? And that's how some of these things start. And just through serendipity, it turns out to be a great benefit for us. But I think early on, we kind of identified that as a goal in a way, as one of those moonshots was to have an article in the New York Times.
And the other thing strategically is we've recognized early on that, if we try to get an ad in Fly Fish Journal or the Drake or, a big fly fishing related magazine, then we've got to outspend all these giant companies, Sims and Sage and Orvis and, all these big companies to have a voice in those places. So we've kind of taken a non-traditional route and said, instead of chasing, telling our story only in a fly fishing venue, let's find places that fly fishermen visit that aren't just fly fishing specific, and let's tell our story there. And so even like your podcast, this isn't the world of fly fishing with Ed Roberson. It's like we're reaching out to people who may or may not fly fish. And the funny thing about the Times article that I heard a ton was, and my mom does this too, but an article would come through about fly fishing in the Times, and everybody's mother seemed to send them a copy of that article. It's like, oh, did you hear about these guys in Montana that make these fly fishing poles? And and we had our customers write us and be like, yep, my mom sent us the article. And so it definitely spread around the fly fishing community, even though it was a non-fly fishing piece.
But Matt, your marketing strategy, that's the exact opposite of what my business school professor said you should do. When are you going to learn that? I want to talk more about your marketing, because I feel like y'all have done so great with it. And we talked about this a bit on, offline, but I remember one time you said, like, maybe Outside Magazine had a little blurb about your business, and then you went on somebody's podcast around the same time, and the podcast had so much more of an influence on business in the door than the blurb. And I think everybody, myself included, would think, oh man, if I could get an Outside Magazine, that would be it. And so how have you guys thought about marketing maybe a little more in depth, versus, just buying ads, putting ads, going to fly fishing shows, which, you do all that, but maybe some lessons you've learned from that could be applied to any small business?
I think, we talk about a little bit about how we kind of were founded and what we learned from Tom and Gerri. And I think authenticity has always been a pretty big goal of ours when we think about things that are really kind of our core principles. And when we think about marketing, I think it's fair to say we try to think of things that are authentic, not, a fishing guy here with a picture of a large brown trout in our rod, broed out. It's more like the guy who's an old guy who's been fishing the Henry's Fork for 30 years and only does wade fishing. We want to have authentic representation, and that doesn't always seem to be the product blurb placement. I think the thing about podcasts is that you hear our voices, so I think it feels a little more authentic or real, and that's why we've seen more success there. I think part of that is trying a lot of different things to see what sticks, and then you double down on the things that seem to stick. The challenge that we identified early on, maybe even before we bought the business, which I think still remains the challenge, is how do you get people to find out about your company organically? Because Tom and Gerri were so limited by their circumstances and Tom's health, they couldn't go to shows, they couldn't go travel, they didn't have bandwidth to do more. A lot of the challenges are not that we don't have a great product. It's that how do you get it into people's hands or make more people aware of it? And that's been a real challenge for like year after year. It's a really kind of tough nut to crack. And we have a bit of a non-traditional distribution system too. So a lot of people buy fly rods at your fly shop. We don't make enough fly rods in order to support a dealer network that way. So we had to try to brainstorm different ways to authentically represent our product to people that maybe are a little outside of our audience, or maybe fly fishermen that are consuming other goods that would then see it, things like shotguns, or like Matt said, podcasts that are more about the West, or maybe it's a geographical connection. Or we'd get all the time like, oh, you guys are in Montana. Like, people have an affinity for Montana. They may not actually be fly fishermen. So we always try to make sure that people know we're in Montana. We put Montana on our hats. We make sure that people maybe don't fly fish feverishly, but they know about Montana or want a Montana good. And that's another way to try to come about that. I don't know what your thoughts are. Yeah.
I think, as Ed, we talked about the podcast, the beauty of it, it's evergreen. Someone can go listen to an episode that you recorded a year and a half ago. It's old to you because you've moved on in the recordings, and to your faithful listeners who listen to every episode, that's an old one. But I all the time am picking up podcasts that are 2, 3, 4 years old or even discontinued, but it's brand new to me. And whoever underwrote that ad is still relevant. So, I think that's a neat thing about podcasts is how they are always new to the person listening to it for the first time.
And I think y'all's story is just really perfect for the medium, because you both are so interesting individually. The story of how you acquired the business is so interesting. The backstory of the business before you had it is interesting. And it's the kind of thing that could not be explained in even like a 1,500 word article in a magazine. I mean, you couldn't get the nuance of it unless you're just a master writer. But I think, obviously you make extremely, extremely high quality stuff, but I think the story is also part of what people are excited to buy. And so anyway, it's funny that we met through this podcast. Your cousin introduced us. It's good for me too.
It's fortuitous, but you kind of asked me earlier, maybe it was even before we did the podcast, like what are some things even the pandemic has brought to light or shown you? But, we had a direct to consumer model that was web-based. And before the pandemic hit, we had sought out some funding from the state of Montana, got a grant to update our website. So we brought it over to the Shopify platform. We were able to hire some photographers to get some really nice imagery and capture the story. So we had made that move prior to COVID really happening. And it was really, nothing but luck. It wasn't obviously like we forecasted that. We just thought it was the right time in our company to focus on that platform since that's where we sell. And what happened through the pandemic was that, brick and mortar really struggled. People weren't going to go into a shop to shop. And a friend of mine who does a lot of online marketing said that, studies have shown that, between where we would naturally have progressed, the pandemic made it accelerate by a factor of 5 to 7 years or something like that. So people's online shopping habits today are where they would be 5 years from now had we not had the pandemic. So, and they're just used to it. We all did Instacart because we didn't want to catch COVID, and we did these things, but people are still doing Instacart or still doing pickup at a store or that kind of thing. So we were really in the right place at the right time. We certainly worked hard to put those things in place, but we were really lucky. That and the fact that our supply chain is all US based. So we have had all of our raw materials on hand through the shortages that other companies have experienced from overseas production, and we sell direct to the consumer. So we're having our best year ever. Part of it is that the outdoor industry is blowing up because people are getting back outside. But I think the other part of it is we're not reliant on brick and mortar, and we're not reliant on, overseas supply chains.
Yeah, that whole supply chain, whether you're talking about agriculture or raw materials, metal, whatever, I think that this COVID deal has really shown how fragile that whole network can be. So I'm glad it worked out for y'all. Because it's man, who would have ever guessed? Seriously. So kind of like a business owner management type question. And again, this whole podcast is selfish so I can learn stuff that I can use. But you guys, I can't imagine how complex everything you're doing is, like as far as all these different, orders going in, materials coming in, you've got employees, you've got all these different kind of details that need to be dealt with. And I feel like a lot of my day is spent kind of in overwhelm of trying to figure out, like, I got all these things that need to be done, and I need to have some system to do it better because keep keeping all the balls in the air. What have y'all learned? What has worked for you over the last 3 years of just, do you have any systems in place or anything to manage that? Or is it you hire really great people? How do you keep all these balls in the air? And again, because I'm trying to figure out how to do it for myself.
Well, I think it's a combination of things. I think Matt is significantly more organized than I am, which helps.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is hiring really good people. Hiring has been difficult. I think we've been lucky to have some really good employees that had some level of experience, or I think what we probably look for more than anything is the ability to solve problems independently. And that's a tough thing to find. But like one of our employees just is great about, taking something and figuring it out. and we've had a succession of employees that have filled that role, which has been really lucky for us. I think moving to the new platform, the Shopify platform, I was just sitting here trying to think of the old platform, how it would have worked with this volume, and it would have been a challenge. So I think some of the things we did in advance of the pandemic, because we thought it was good for the business or good to have that process in place, have really benefited us as things have ramped up a little bit. I think there still is a fair amount of things we could integrate. Like shipping for us is still maybe not as integrated as it could be. And there's some things we do ad hoc just because we like to have a personal touch. If somebody calls and they want to rod FedEx tomorrow, like we do everything we can because we still feel like that customer connection is so important to us and such a part of what we do, that we don't want it to be, an anonymous service center that they call to get something expedited or find out status. But some of those things are pinch points, I think, if you were to look at the ops model from a business school standpoint. But part of that too is authenticity for us and dealing with Matt and I directly when we're building something for you. And, I think we don't want to lose that. It's funny. I think Tom always said, we had kind of rose-colored glasses when we started this. We thought we'd be making, so many more rods by now. And Tom always said, the number of rods you can make will be dictated by the quality of the rods you're making. Once that quality suffers, you'll know you're doing too much, or you don't have enough people, or something has to change. And so we kind of use that as a guiding principle a little bit to know if we're doing okay or not. Are the rods really good? Are they suffering? Are people sending things back? Are they disappointed? Are they buying more rods? On the plus side. So we use those all as kind of gauges for if we're doing okay.
I think on a big level, I think one of the things probably in a small business, whether you talked about co-founders or a single founder, is to want to own everything. And I think one of the things that helps is empowering employees to make their own decisions. And, a great example today is, a customer wrote us an email that typically Joel or I would respond to. And one of our employees jumped in and responded to the customer just like Joel or I would. But it took that off our plate. I didn't have a to-do item today that was to reply to that email. And I'm really excited that he just took it upon himself to reply and not say, oh, that's an owner's job or that, that kind of thing. On a really small level, the thing I've learned is despite how good you think you are, you can't remember everything. Yeah. So I have a notebook that it was back from my days, in the school where I was always walking meetings and parents and other teachers and kids and stuff, and just this little Moleskine notebook that sat on my, it was in my hand at all times. And no matter how little the idea is, you just got to write it down and stick with it because I go through these little periods of bravado where I think I'm really smart and I have any memory left, and I'll remember that, and then 2 days later it's gone. So I think writing down every single thing is important.
Yeah, I think I still believe in that mantra. If you don't write it down, it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm with you. I mean,
find ourselves coming through notebooks looking for our old notes. Yeah,
that's exactly the same one.
That's notebook. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm holding up my notebook right now. That I've also found with the writing it down. I mean, it's such a basic thing, but I think it can get lost. Is that it's energy to try to remember and make sure I don't forget stuff. And if I have this system in place where I know, right, I write it down and then it goes wherever it needs to go, and then I don't have to think about it anymore. Because I think there's some productivity kind of guy named Cal Newport that I really like his stuff, and he talks about having open loops, like stuff in your head that needs to be done and needs to be finished, and you're trying to manage all of it. And as simple as having this notebook with me all the time, writing down every thought that comes into my head, and then I'm done with it. Like I don't have to worry about it. It's huge. Yeah.
I was feeling frazzled the last couple of days. Too much was out there. And I sat down this morning and just took my notebook back out. And every single thing I could think of, whether it was a vendor thing or emailing a customer or asking a question to Joel or anything, I just wrote down a fresh list of every single thing I could possibly think of. And it relieves the stress because your brain isn't trying to make sure those balls are still in the air. And it doesn't mean completing every one of those things this morning. It just means recording everything and then biting into it.
Getting it out of your head, brain dump.
Who wrote that book about the open loops? Cal Ripken?
Cal Ripken. His name's Cal Newport, and he's like,
I'm just making a quick note.
No, he's got a book. He's got a bunch of them, but one of them that was really impactful for me is called Deep Work, and it's about just the need to be able to spend time focused and not being distracted. And then he's got another one called Digital Minimalism, and then he's got a new one that just came out that I have not yet read yet called A World Without Email, which I love the title. And so, but he's got a podcast too, and he's a computer scientist by trade, tenured professor at Georgetown, but then has this kind of second career of writing, podcast, all that. And he seems to have figured out a way to do a lot of work in a reasonable amount of time and not be frazzled or overworked or burned out in the process. And it's pretty practical. It's not like life hacks nonsense. It's practical advice. So yeah, I'll have links for anybody else who is having the same
I think the
issues.
other thing, Ed, and I think you and I texted at one point, probably one evening when I was asking you questions about it, but during the pandemic, I definitely, when we were juggling, school from home and, shop shutdowns and, all that craziness, I definitely felt myself spinning a bit. And, I hadn't been a guy doing much of this before, and I know you're really into it, but I started doing some meditation through an app. I think it's called 10% Happier. Yeah. But it's a series of videos, little video kind of intro and then a guided meditation after. And I'd be up at 4:30 in the morning pacing around the living room before the rest of the house woke up. And I started making it a point to sit down, just after my cup of coffee, just sit down and go through one of these 10-minute meditations. And, I wouldn't have written the book on meditation before this, but it's real. It definitely mitigated some of the stress and took some of that frazzle away.
Oh man, what kind of softy Montanans are we? I've studied some silent Buddhist meditation too, so I meditate as well.
Do you really? Do you use it? Do you use an app or what? How do you do it?
No, I had done a course years ago, probably because a girl I was dating had done it, and I wanted to impress her. But it was a 10-day silent meditation retreat. It's a technique called Vipassana.
Oh yeah.
Indian meditation technique. Definitely. So that's what I do. Yeah, if I have time. I certainly don't do it every day, but I try not to beat myself up about not doing it because I think that's counterproductive.
Yeah.
No, I think it's really helpful just to find that time. And it kind of sounds like it aligns a little bit with this deep work idea, of actual focus and quiet time and, all that stuff. It does seem to have a real effect. It's been amazing. Yep.
No, I'd say, and my wife would say, which you can trust her more than you can trust me because she's the one that has to deal with me. But I've been fully focused on, like fully committed to that for probably coming up on 9 years now. And I'd say it's the single most important thing I've ever done, for my just overall, and it's not a quick fix. I mean, it's like, I use this analogy a lot, but it's like, driving a aircraft carrier or a cargo ship. And, if you make a little tiny turn 3 or 4 years later, you'll be in a completely different place. And I feel like that meditation has been invaluable for controlling my brain a little bit better. So that's cool that y'all, another for people listening who are interested, 10% Happier is awesome. And there's a really good book called 10% Happier about meditation, kind of secular, real world type stuff. And then I use an app called Waking Up by Sam Harris. And I was always against apps for meditation because I'm like, the damn phone's the problem. I need that away. But it's the best instruction I've ever received. And I've had formal instruction from, Buddhist teachers and all this stuff. So that's cool. I'm glad y'all shared that because I think people can benefit from that.
So that's like 40% happier. I just need a little more than 10%.
Yeah. Well,
4 times. Is that how it works? I think that's part of it too, is you have to find something that helps you refresh, whatever that is, in your life. Because I think to Matt's point, you can't remember everything. And certainly we found out that you can work 24 hours a day if there's things to do all the time. Mm-hmm. You don't leave at the end of the day and think, I got everything done I needed today. Tomorrow's a fresh start. Like there's a lot of prioritization that happens. And there's a lot of, hitting up against your own boundaries and faculties that happens when you're running a business, I think.
Definitely. There's always more. There's always stuff that can be done. And it's a matter of just figuring out what kind of mental framework can you have to keep it so it doesn't drive you crazy. One other business question for you. One of the things that struck me about how you guys do business is I feel like there's a spirit of generosity in what you do. I mean, you want and you need to make money to keep the business going and to pay your mortgage and support your family and all that. But from my outside perspective, it seems that you really approach things with a spirit of generosity, everything from, all right, I want to build this ride so that it is a rod that will be in this family forever and will be passed down to a grandson one day, versus let's churn and burn these things and get them to buy, 15 rides over the next 15 years. And then just the way that the way you've treated me, I mean, you've every now and then some stickers will show up in the mail or a t-shirt and then you were so generous with when I had my live podcast in Bozeman. And I think there's stories like that. Anybody who's dealt with y'all over the years has similar stories. And, from my perspective, like I used to be in the real estate world, which is not generous. And I felt like when I made a shift to kind of trying to approach things with a generous mentality, whether it's this putting the podcast out that can hopefully help people or my conservation work that is trying to help people, that's when things kind of changed for me and I felt like things got much, much better. And so is that a conscious choice y'all made to approach your business like that? Or is it just how you're wired?
I think, like Joel said, just trying to be authentic and genuine about everything you do. If we tried to write that into the business plan or tried to suddenly start doing that, I think it would be disingenuous and it wouldn't work. So I think that I've never thought really about that. I mean, as you say it's really nice to hear. And I hope other customers and employees and people have had that experience with us. But I got to think that's just a bit about how we're hardwired and how we approach things. Because I've never really woken up in the morning and said, I need to make sure I tick off a couple generous acts to make the business work.
I think that's true. I think I've been working on this mantra lately, or working off this mantra. It's certainly not mine, just of trying to work hard and be nice to people. Mm-hmm. I feel like is a really nice way to go through life. And I really, like Matt said, it's nice to hear that you've had that experience. And we certainly hope that everybody has that experience. I think we oftentimes have conversations like, I guess it's maybe coming from a place of feeling like things are more bountiful than they seem. Like there's more room for us or for people to get our products, like we give people things, like, should we do this to help, or should we, we feel bad about the way something turned out, so we want to help or make somebody feel better. I think we want people to have positive experiences with our products and with us. And so I guess that's probably what guides it. I don't know that it's a real conscious thing for us so much as it's just something that flows out of. And I think Tom was always pretty generous with knowledge and time too. Mm-hmm. People still call us and say, well, I called years ago and Tom is actually the guy that answered the phone. Can you believe it? And so that idea of just being pretty authentic and upfront and feeling like there's room for us, without having to be super competitive. And we've always wanted to not come across as particularly salesy. Yeah. We want products to be right fits for people, and we want people to be excited to get the product and have it for a long time, and that's not going to be a product that you feel like, I got some regrets about, that wasn't the right one, or maybe I should have spent that money on that, or I didn't really have it, or, we don't want that to be the outcome of a decision to buy one of our products.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it is, obviously the generosity is a big part, but the authenticity is a big part. And so those would be at odds if you were just acting generous, because it wouldn't be authentic. So I tell you, I really I admired it when we first met, but seeing everything, all this crazy times we've been through and how y'all have stuck to your values, you've kept the business going, you've grown it, evolving it, it's super inspiring. And I think people can take lessons from it, whether they're in business or nonprofit or whatever. I mean, I think that's why I wanted to have y'all on, just because I just think there are all these universal lessons about work that are important. One non-work question for you. How's it been for families? Has it been as great in Montana as you had hoped? Seems like y'all are thriving.
Well, as you know, it's our mission in life to get you and Kim and the girls to move up here. So we're still working. I think we were incredibly fortunate through the pandemic to, in some ways, to own our own business where, I was able to, say I'm going to work from home today because my son's schooling, or, there was flexibility there. And then the other thing is the amount of just space and the lack of people that we have up here, even though Bozeman feels crowded and it does feel like it's growing. I felt very fortunate during the pandemic, that my life wasn't as affected as, maybe other family members of mine that don't live in Montana. I was able to get done with work and get in the truck and go for a mountain bike ride or go ski at Bridger or go fly fishing. So I certainly felt the pains that we all felt, as far as wearing masks and, but those were first world problems to have to make a reservation to ski on a Saturday or, something like that. I just felt very fortunate for the people that surrounded us and the space to not have our lives affected, quite as much. So I'd say everybody's doing well, but looking forward to, fingers crossed, that we all keep moving in this direction of more and more ability to get out and be around other people.
Yeah. I would say for us, it's been better probably than we expected.
Really?
Yeah. I try to tell my son pretty regularly, like, don't forget where you're growing up.
Yeah.
When you wake up and look out the window, like, this is your playscape right here, and not a lot of people have these opportunities. I think talking to friends and families that were in cities during all of this, and I think it would have been very different. We were lucky to have moved right before the pandemic started to a place with a little bit of land, and we just kind of ensconced ourselves with our two young kids, and we didn't feel a lot of the risk and a lot of the tension, I think, that other people did. But it's been really great. And I think for a business here, being an outdoor business in Bozeman, I think it's been great too. It's a really great environment here. There are a lot of small entrepreneur-run businesses that we have leaned on and had support from that might have been harder to find in a larger environment. And people were interested in what you're doing, and everybody here fishes, so you get a lot of organic feedback, good and bad, but it's been unique in that way as well. So yeah, I think we're really fortunate to be here.
Yeah, it's a cool scene up there, man. I think I really love it.
For your listeners that don't know, my wife texts your wife property listings every time we see a house. She texts Kim and says, just so you're ready.
Yeah. They're like Zillow gurus. I just spent half my career in the real estate business, and I don't know a damn thing about Zillow, and they're just like, this is only X such and such square feet, and it's unbelievable. Well, keep pushing on me. We'll see. I always have to ask about books. Have y'all read any good books recently or in the last few years, impactful things that you'd recommend other people read?
Yeah. To be told, since we've been on the podcast before, I knew this question was coming. So I went back and looked through some things I'd read recently. And I guess over the last year, I'm a big fiction guy. I was a fiction major in college, and I don't do well with nonfiction. I fall asleep. But the book I finished actually yesterday was Cloudmaker.
Malcolm Brooks.
Book. Yeah.
I have not read it yet. I need to.
It's really cool. And I'd read Painted Horses before, but I really liked Cloudmaker. Just finished that one up.
Awesome.
And then another one, I think August, that was one of your recommendations, Callan Wink's book, and that was really great. I just like, all those books have geographic landmarks here in Southwest Montana that are recognizable. So it's fun to read about little towns and places that, we've been. And the other one, I don't know if I ended up telling you or recommending this one to you or if you've read it, but Whiskey When We're Dry. Have you read that?
You're like the third person who's told me I need to read that recently. Yeah, several people have said that it's awesome, but I have not read it. No.
It's cool. This again, I had to look up, but John Larison's the author. But it's a Western novel, But what's cool about it is it's turned on its head with a female protagonist. So, it's not your typical Western, troubled guy that's shooting up the ghost town kind of thing. But it's got a female protagonist that's really strong and a refreshing take on that genre.
Awesome, Joel, you got any?
I got one and another one. My wife picked up a book that I actually started reading called Shop Class as Schoolcraft.
Oh yeah, I had that shop class as Soulcraft. It's
Soulcraft. Yeah,
I love it. Yeah, which
was pretty interesting, and I think kind of, at least in a lot of ways, mirrors some of the themes of what Matt and I are doing and trying to do.
It does.
So I'm kind of pecking my way through that one, and then I'm kind of a science fiction guy too. I just read a book from a long time ago. I reread it. It's called The Forever War. It's from the 70s. It's a science fiction book, kind of about time travel and the morals of time travel and the challenges.
Nice. But, I'll have links to all those in the notes. So the last kind of big question, and this is always hard for humble people like you guys to answer, but do you have any kind of parting words of wisdom, something you'd ask of the people that listen to this thing? I'd ask them to buy a rod, but I know you won't ask them to do that. Yeah. Anything come to mind to wrap it up?
I think what I said, my it probably sounds different now, or maybe too optimistic at that time, but I think that people have kind of come around to this idea of buying things that are made where they are, and supporting local craftsmen. And I think that's kind of my marching order always is I feel better when I'm buying something from somebody in Bozeman than from somebody far away. And, choosing to buy products that are just high quality products you're going to have, kind of trying to defeat, Matt and I talk about planned obsolescence, trying to defeat that idea by buying just really high quality products that you plan to keep for a long time. I just challenge people when they're consumers to do that.
I think, Joel talked about talking with his son about being thankful. My son and I floated the lower Madison the other day on Sunday, and fishing was slow. But we saw an eagle and an osprey and herd of elk and antelope, and he had his birds of North America book. He's 8, but he had his binoculars around his neck and his Birds of North America book out. And at one point, I just was standing in the water, and I just remember thinking to myself, like, this is pretty darn good, and this is not, from a fishing standpoint, I did not have any Instagram photos of giant brown trout, and I was not, hooting and hollering about the sheer number of fish I'd caught that day. But just remembering to be thankful for what we've got is pretty important.
I think that's perfect, man. Well, guys, I'm really impressed. I'm glad to know you both. I know people can get a lot of value out of listening to this, but keep up the good work. I'll see you all very soon.
Thanks, man.
Ed.
Be good.
See you soon.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number 1, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number 2, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number 3, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number 4, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. 1 email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists, with more on the way. So head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.